Hello, patrons. Yes, that is what you think it is. We making diamonds and sauce. And let me just show you real quick the one thing that I fucking really miss about BHO and don't miss when processing. I'm sorry. Totally miss about BHO. It's kind of sad that I'm not able to. Oh, fuck it. I don't know how to say it. See that guy right there? That's fucking wax. Just a solid piece of wax. And you can look and see all the other fat in the bottom of there too. But look at that. It's like as white as a ghost. A little bit of yellow in there from the terps, but. So, this is not going to be a very long video. I don't have the time to put together. Here's the problem. I want to make content for you guys, and I want to make content that really delves into the chemistry. And so rather than wait weeks and weeks, and by that I mean like some of these videos I shoot like the extraction, and then the next day I shoot a couple minutes, and then 5 days later I shoot a couple minutes, and then maybe 2 weeks after that I might shoot the pour, and then 3 more days after that I might shoot the finishing of the per. You see what I mean? These videos take forever to put together, and for you guys to have enough to look at. So I thought I would approach this a little bit differently. Obviously, as you can see, I've performed the BHO extraction. I used isobutane. Bring it in here, and yes, isobutane. And yes, you guys, you can't hear my ventilation right now running, because if you could, I'd be screaming over top of it. So, yeah, say what you will. I guess I'm not being very safe right now. But absolutely nothing is under pressure. The worst case scenario right now would be if I were to for some reason decide to light a lighter or light something and light one of those jars on fire. Or maybe some of the remnants of the butane in this Pyrex dish. But, just beware of your surroundings, beware of your boiling temperatures. If you have your jars in a setting that's below 30.2 degrees, then they're not even off-gassing or boiling. The boiling point of butane is 30.2 degrees. So that's what I'd like to talk to you about right now. And I'm going to walk you through it without having done it or having done it already. Because I feel like if I walk you through me doing it on camera, I get so lost and the video takes so damn long. So let me pause you real quick and we'll get started, and I'll walk you through what I just did to ultra dewax these jars. And this is some content that's for some of my BHO guys wanting to know about some diamonds and sauce, etc., etc. This is how you achieve super saturation. What that means is how you achieve a pure enough oil inside of the jar with a low enough amount of solvent, but still enough present that it will can create serious back pressure. Anyway, that's it. That's literally it. I'm sorry, those are the only 2 requirements. So what I'm going to show you in this video is how you can, after doing your extraction and performing a dewax, and then you pour out into Pyrex, and then after you pour out into Pyrex, you pour into jars, or whatever you're going to do, or maybe you just pour straight into jars, whatever you're going to do. But the fact of the matter is, I would recommend pouring into Pyrex first, because then you can do a decanting technique, and I'll talk about that in just a second. And you decant into the first 2 jars, and then we'll pick up right after the pause here with what you do. This is, let's pretend, well, you know what? Fuck pretending. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Look what I found. This ought to make this a little easier. All right, so far my favorite thing about this camera has been its incredibly wide angle. So, I apologize for the way less than impressive lab attire. Anyway, the garage door that is behind you, actually, I'm sorry, I guess the one that's directly behind you is closed, but there's 2 garage doors behind you. One of them is open, about 4 feet, and that That's of course aiding my ventilation when I have it turned off right now. But let's remember one thing. The only place that I have anything off gassing is this tiny little bit of jar, this tiny little bit in this jar right here. Which, look at that fucking chunk of wax one more time. Shit, I dropped it. Anyway, you can't get that out in rosin, man. You can do a really clean wash and then press really fire hash and get and absolutely match that quality, the quality that I'm about to match in these jars right here, or make in these jars. You can absolutely do that. It's more than feasible. Why do I feel like I'm not? Okay, anyway, more than feasible. Now, how that's more than feasible, of course, again, you got, okay, it's light. Whether you use a wash machine or you wash by hand in a bucket or whatever it is, when you're doing solvent, you can wash your hash very gently, and you can very meticulously grade. You can't see any of that. Fuck. They're on my bags and everything. But as you can very specifically divide the grades or micron values up of the size of your hash, the heads in hash, and you can then easily isolate the 90 to 119 or the 120 to 159 or maybe the 73 to 89. Personally, a lot of times I like the 73 to 119 or maybe even the 90 all the way up to the 159. It's a little bit broader of a spectrum, but it has just tons and tons of flavor and almost all the punch that you can get. When doing that, you get an incredibly clean product. You don't need to think about dewaxing and second stage dewaxing, which if you do not have a cryo freezer, if you do not have a closed loop system or a closed loop system with, a jacketed closed loop system and a chiller that has the ability to reach supercritical temperatures, you're going to need to know this step. You finish going through your closed loop system. You do everything you need to do. You run it through your dewax column. You fill your dewax column full of dry ice, or let's say you have a jacketed system and you hook it up to a chiller and you turn your chiller down to as cold as it can get, and unless it's negative 80 degrees Celsius and you're doing it probably twice, you're not getting it all out. You're just not getting all the wax out. It is what it is. So here comes my tried and true little technique for second stage single solvent dewax. And by that, I should clarify. We've already done our dewaxing within our extraction. After we pass the oil, or after we pass the solvent over the biomass, we then let it sit for a little area in a chamber of the system that is incredibly cold, and then pass it through very fine filters, leaving a lot of the wax behind. Then pour it into those jars. Then, when I poured into those jars, they look great. They look almost like they look right now, just a little bit darker. So I pour it into those two jars. Let's pretend these are those two jars, because as a matter of fact, they work. I do not have a cryogenic freezer. I do not have an endless supply of dry ice. I do not have a supercritical chiller that can get my closed loop system's dewaxing chamber down to temperatures that can literally single solvent winterize it. Now there's dewaxing and winterization. When you dewax, you pull all the wax and lipids and fats that you can from the solution, obviously. When you winterize, you're cleaning it. And even if you need to repeat the process a half a dozen times with ethanol, pardon me. Just realized I didn't have the inlet switch open. And of course it's a vacuum oven, so you need to keep all your inlets and vacuum ports closed. And yes, I have a pump hooked up to this and everything, but that's not necessary. Also, I have a nitrogen tank ported for the inlet hole. So when what you just heard there, if you heard that off camera, I don't know if you can see that or not. Anyway, when you heard me opening the inlet switch, rather than letting the air that's coming in this garage, or maybe even coming in from outside, on the other side of that door, being hooked up to a ported nitrogen tank, number one, lets an inert gas come in. Inert meaning it. We created a little bit. I put the lid on here too quick. We created a little bit of pressure. Anyway, an inert gas just meaning that it will not interfere with anything else and it will not do anything else. It's not combustible. It just sits. It can be pressurized, and well, then you can weaponize anything that you can pressurize, but it will not explode. It will not. It's as stable as can be. Inert, as a matter of fact, it's beyond stability. It's inert. There's your Google term for the day. Okay, so patrons, here we are. We have our extract, and we finished our extraction running through our closed loop. We finished our dewaxing, and it left us with about enough oil. After, let's say, pouring it out, let's do the whole step. After pouring the entire thing out into a Pyrex and letting it sit in this Pyrex, not on a heat pad or anything like that, just sit here in a safe, like a vacuum oven space, something that won't get contaminated in it. If you don't have a vacuum oven, or if you don't have a vacuum oven that can fit your Pyrex, you can just set some aluminum foil over top of it, or even just a piece of parchment paper. Just do whatever you need to do to keep the contaminant out of it. But let it sit on a stainless steel or a metal surface. All you're doing here then is just letting that wax layer that will appear across the bottom, that white layer. Then when I went to decant it, as you can see obviously from this pan, I poured it out of this corner right here, very much like into this jar, just like this. Can you guys see that? Just like this. Now, obviously I didn't turn it up like that and go for it, or that wouldn't have saved anything behind there in the pan that I saved behind, and that's there on purpose. I know it looks clear to you right now, but it's at room temperature right now, or at least 60 degrees, 55 to 60 degrees. That's way too warm for wax to precipitate. And by precipitate, I mean form a solid. And yes, I know I have DHL dripping right there. That's okay though. We'll get it cleaned up. So, I let it sit in this pan for, depending on the size of your run, depending on the temperature of your room, etc., you'll see. I let it sit in this pan for long enough that when I very gently picked it up, I like to use a clear table if possible, or at least a surface where I can, you guys can see this, where I can do this kind of a thing. So that then I just take a little light. Where's my flashlight? Click, click, pretend I have a flashlight, and I go right underneath here and look, and then I can see whether or not there's a nice thick disc of the adipose or the lipid forming on the bottom of the pan. Once that, and you really don't need to wait too long. 30 minutes, an hour, tops. And you also want this in a cold enough area that during that 30 minutes or an hour, your butane's not going to boil away. Does that make sense? You need this to stay liquid for this process. So, and stay way more liquid than it is just completely dewaxed. Yes, terpenes are very runny when they're fully dewaxed and properly made, but not this runny. I need it to be a ball. Anyway, we got a nice white cake layer in the bottom of our pan. I very gently pour into jar A, very gently pour into jar B, and then take jars A and B, cap them very, very tightly, place them down into the freezer very gently, which this is a relatively deep freeze. No, it's not cryogenic, but it is a deep freeze, and it gets to, I can get it to about negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Plenty cold enough to after it's been sitting in there in that freezer for a little while. I mean, look at that chunk of wax that came out of that one. That's not oil, people. That's just wax. The little bubbles that you see bubbling around it, that's BHO. That big chunk you see right there, there it is. That's not oil. This tests for nothing. chlorophyll, anthocyanin. It is not, I mean, I've seen lipids before that have tested, lipid fat like that, that's tested for, 3 and 5% THC. And that was staggeringly high. And maybe, some other people their wax is testing higher than that. And I feel sorry for you because you shouldn't have that much THC in your wax. My THC is in those jars. Now, let's fast forward 25 minutes. Those 2 jars that I just showed you that had A and B, with the lid sealed tight, even though they were full of butane. Crazy, right? Well, they're going right down in the freezer. I don't seal the lid and then go walk around and smoke a dab and maybe eat some steak and then come back and see if it's time to put them in the freezer. As soon as you put the lid on a room temperature jar of butane or a jar of butane in room temperature, you better put it in the freezer. That's pretty obvious, I think. Luckily, that's why we use Bell jars. The lids are, I think, rated at 25 or 27 PSI, and the glass jars are rated right around 50. So 99 times out of 100, that lid is going to foil and pop and release your pressure before your glass jar breaks. That's the reason. In case any of you are wondering why everybody makes diamonds in Bell jars. What the hell? What's the big deal with mason jars? Well, there it is. 25 minutes. Those jars, jar A and jar B, have been sitting inside of this freezer. I very, 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 very carefully and very gently pull jar A and jar B out of the freezer and very carefully bring them over here on top of my Pyrex. After all, we already have a nice big little mess going in here. You can see some of the wax there from before. It looks like I can't zoom in. Oh, I must have steady. That'll be better. That'll be better anyway. Anyway, so then I take jars. Okay, so yeah, I have 2 clean jars sitting right here, which those 2 jars are there now. I take jar A, take the lid off of it. I hold my clean jar above here so that any excess or anything that might spill can just fall right in here into the Pyrex. I mean, why make any more mess than necessary? I wouldn't have even made that mess if I wasn't making this video. So anyway, yeah, the other thing is that, of course, none of this is getting thrown away. All of this will eventually be added to the cleaning bin, which, of course, is full of ethanol. Some of my pressing screens and some of my jars that I'm cleaning today. When I rinse all these out of here and everything, as I'm sure you can probably guess, there is medicine in that alcohol. Now, how do you get that medicine back out? Distillation. Just a very simple short path distillation. Just boil the alcohol right off the top, and rather than let it just escape into Mother Nature, I recollect it and recondense it and fill a beaker full of it. And then when I get my beaker full of it, I take it and I refill either one of those 2 guys. Okay, so as I'm sure you can imagine now, when I pulled these jars out of the freezer after 25, maybe 30 minutes of sitting in there, the white disc that had appeared across the bottom of this Pyrex pan was very, very pronounced. So much so, in some cases, it had formed chunks. See what I'm saying there? Anyway, so that white disc is very, very incredibly pronounced, and I get my clean jars out. And for the record, this is, again, you can do this a couple times if you're really insane about it, or if you really want to make sure that you're going for the highest potency possible. So that's why I did this 3 times. So, and by 3 times, I know you're wondering, come on, bro, really? Yeah. Yes. That's the reason for this auxiliary jar right here. Once we got down to, once I had let enough of the evaporation occur, the first pour off from this pan happened into this jar. And then that jar sat until it created a little disc of wax on the bottom. And then I poured it off the top into this jar. Then this jar is put into the freezer for a half an hour, brought back out with a big thick disc of wax on the bottom, and then poured off into this jar. And as you can see now, instead of having a big fat layer of wax at the bottom, Boy, this will be a lot easier with flash. There you go. Can you see the freezer through there? Let's do a light. There you go. The other thing is that this is so cold, the jar is super frosty, obviously. There's our clarity and there's our coloring now. And that's after 3 single solvent, second stage dewaxes. So again, decanting is the technique. Pouring off the top, leaving the particulate or the soot, or in this case, the lipid that gathered at the bottom of your jar as much as possible, and pouring it off. When you get close to it, you lose a little bit of oil each time, because as soon as you start to see a little bit of particulate flowing into your jar, you cut it, you stop. And there's always a little bit of oil left in there floating around with your wax. So each time I did this, I lost some in the first process, the second process, and the third process. After the third pour into those jars, which was the 4th container, I'm okay with I'll bet it could handle another one. If I were to put the lids on there and put it back in the freezer for, if I were to put it back in the freezer for 12 hours, it could absolutely handle another one. But I'm okay with where it is. It is very efficiently dewaxed, very, very efficiently single solvent winterized, single solvent second stage winterized. And now that I've removed those chunks of fat in there, now when I let it finish evaporating to the point that I want, which of course is when I achieve super saturation, then I'm going to cap this jar. And by the way, I say this jar because these two are just evaporating. They will become one jar. There's just not enough material in there. There's more solvent in there than, we're still at probably 50% solvent. So when each one of these reduced by about half, I will combine them. Actually, I'll probably combine them a little before that. But anyway, we'll combine them, and then I'll bring it down, or bring it down, I mean let it sit in a 72.5 degree environment. That is my set value. Right now it's only at 70.2 degrees, but we're warming up and we're getting there. Anyway, it will not get any hotter than 72.5, and it will not get any colder than 72.5. Once this thing equilibrates, it will stay. It'll sit at that temperature. That's what stable temperature is for, and that's very important in THCA or diamond growth. So, now, this is the point of this video, and I hope this is answering some questions for you guys, and I hope this is helping you. You're running BHO, and I don't care if you're fucking open blasting it. I don't care if you got I mean, this wouldn't be a good example, but let's say this is a glass bottle, and you drilled a hole in the cup here, and you, I don't know, drilled some more holes in the bottom there, and put a screen over top of it, and you stuff this full of weed, and you throw canned butane through there. Not the greatest thing for you. Not at all the greatest thing for you. The mercaptans alone are going to be pretty rough. But either way, even at that point, this is what's beautiful about organic chemistry, chromatography, decanting, filtration, winterization, dewaxing. We don't just remove lipids. A lot of residual solvent is in that hunk of wax. If there was no butane left in that guy right there, it would be microscopic and it would be dry and white looking. Very, very dry and white looking. So, your closed loop system has a dewax chamber on it, and you use it, and you're just not getting quite the diamond growth you'd like. Or maybe you're getting diamond growth, but you're getting little layers of sugar. Or maybe you just haven't cracked it yet. I can almost guarantee you, most of the consultations that I do, the reason that they're not quite there yet is because of inefficient winterization or inefficient dewaxing. This needs to be pure enough that when we reach supersaturation, it is undeniably visible. And rather than talk more and more about that and just bore the shit out of you, I'm going to just bring you back in when it's time to combine, and we'll take a look there and see if we can find any, what I'll talk a whole lot more about, but we'll see if we can find any striations. And if we can, then we'll monitor the content, or how, you know, how much of how saturated the solution is. And then I'll talk to you about when and why I like to cap it when I do. Aside from that, my ultimate success in a diamond and sauce run, in my mind, is the lid might foil a little bit, and by foil I mean pucker up just a little bit. But if your diamond and sauce run requires you ruining 2 or 3 lids, you're obviously putting it in there way too early. Simple as that. So when you get it perfect, this thing will swell up, but it never really foils. You know, it never crinkles. Do you know what I'm saying? And then, of course, in about 5 days, once we have our nice first crash achieved here, we will we'll burp it, and that will really, that pulls on the second crash so hard, and it will literally just the THCA will fall out of the solution like diarrhea out of a baby's diaper. All right, guys. So having said that, of course, this is video 1 of 2. This is a 2-video series on how to affordably and to effectively single solvent second stage dewax your oil so that you can make proper diamonds and sauce and see proper diamond growth with faceting and clarity. So part 2 of the video will be in about 5 to 7 days, I assume, depending on the strain. 5 to 7 days, and when our first crash is about done, and I want to give it a good burp and really bring on the second crash and let the rest of the THCA fall out, or encourage it to fall out. And so we'll make another video when we go to do that, and usually because there's only a day or 2 in between that second crash and the purging, I may just put that all together in one video. But either way, if I don't include the purging, I will at least tell you what I'm going to do from here. But I'm pretty sure all of us in here know what we're doing as far as purging goes. Just in case you're not sure, with diamonds and sauce, when I'm finished in one of these jars and I've grown all the crystals that I can on the bottom of the jar and the terpene fraction is on the top, I'm going to pour it through a screen, obviously, into not another jar, into a Pyrex pan. Why into a Pyrex pan? Because I want it to lay out as thin as possible. Then I put that Pyrex pan and the jar of just stones in the vacuum oven for 48 hours, non-stop, with that pump running for 48 hours at 72.5 degrees. Yes, I've shared a lot more temperatures and a lot more specifics of the process than you normally would get from me without paying for a consultation. So I hope some of you are getting a little something from this. And Mickey, this one was inspired by you, brother. I know you needed some hydrocarbon content, and unfortunately for the next couple weeks, I got a lot of solventless content coming down. So I didn't want to leave you hanging. I hope you guys all get something out of this video. And I think just about all of us are either making BHO or making solventless hash or making both or whatever. Well, here you go. With this video and part 2 of this series, you can open blast into a Pyrex pan. And with just the usage of some cold temperatures and some patience, and then again what we call decanting, which is to pour off the top. We leave the wax behind, and we repeat that process enough times that, number one, we try to keep from diminishing too many of our returns. As you can see, we've clearly wasted oil in here. But if I was to gather all this back up and purge it, I bet it wouldn't even be a gram. I bet it wouldn't even be a half gram. Then again, I've done this, oh my God. I was just gonna try and guess how many times. I have no idea. I've been doing this for 6 years. So this is a technique I developed in 2014 when I was working with a company that I had a dry ice relationship with another small business in that town, and the company that I was processing for fucked off the relationship with my dry ice provider and wouldn't pay them. And then, of course, and then at the same time, out of the same mouth, turned around to me and said, "You can still make diamonds in sauce though, right?" Well, luckily I don't typically look at situations like that and go, "Man, no, I needed that. I need to put this." And to be honest with you, I think that's why I get the amount of work that I get. Rather than fucking complain about it, I accept it as a healthy challenge. Now, Sarah, if you see this, between us, we know that I do some complaining in private. But to my employer, I would assume that I'm probably a reasonable employee, if not a good one, or maybe even great. When I get approached with situations like this, rather than bitch or ask why, or why didn't you just pay, or why don't you just do it, or pay, I need my dry ice, I say, give me a couple days, and I'll get back to you. And this is exactly what I said, give me a couple days and I'll get back to you. Worst case scenario, I have a secondary dry ice supplier that's out of town that we may have to use, but it's better than nothing. And by the end of the week, I developed this process. And yes, it takes a solid 2 to 3 hours longer than if you were to be able to just single solvent secondary dewax with dry ice. But it works. It's cheap. You do not need a cryo freezer. You do not need dry ice. All you need is patience, a freezer, and a little bit of glass. A couple lids. Okay, guys. I will bring you back in for the end of part 1 when these have evaporated down, which you can see they've already evaporated down a good bit. But when they've evaporated down a little bit further, we'll combine them, and then we'll probably give the video another pause break, because I'm sure after I combine them, we'll have a little bit more evaporation to do before we reach the point of supersaturation that I want to reach before I cap it. And in the second half of this video, or in the rest of this video, we'll talk about all of that, the specifics of why and when I'm doing what I'm doing, and exactly when I'm doing it. Okay, I'll see you guys when about that much butane is evaporated. Okay, what's happening over here? Doesn't look like a whole lot of change, but I'll bet it's enough. Let's get us set up here. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I appreciate you sticking with me this long. Hopefully I haven't completely lost your interest. For those of you that, I don't know, have no idea what's going on here, I'm showing you guys how to make clean sauce. And by clean, I mean clean of wax and lipids. Why is that so important? Well, it's the only way you're going to get truly beautiful. Not only truly beautiful precipitation, as in fewer points of precipitation, which would lead to larger crystals, but that's how you're going to get the clarity and the faceting, those sharp edges that you want. Now, obviously, to make this simple, I'm going to look and see if either one of these has any wax on the bottom that it has happened to accumulate. This one seems to have just a tiny bit floating. So let's see what we got here. Oh, I got it. Oops, hit my head. Anyway, I caught it right there. You guys see it? Oops. Right there, that little white piece. Sometimes decanting is perfect, because if you hold your jar at an angle, slowly, if you tilt it slowly enough, and you hold your jar at an angle and keep it steady, the wax will literally sit up in the dry corner, and then the butane that's pouring out of it, it can't even pick up the wax and pour it into your second jar. So at that point, pardon me. At that point, we got a jar that's ready to go. And again, I know this isn't doing much for clarity for you, There we go. So I will try and first, actually, to make this keep from making a mess, I'm gonna put a lid on the top for a second. I know it won't blow up just yet. But I'm gonna go ahead and wipe off the sides of the jar here. So I want you to see the coloring and the clarity that we're going for. And as I'm sure you can tell, that's with the lid on the top. Let's go ahead and relieve the pressure. This is the coloring and the clarity that we're going for. Now that we've combined jars, let's go ahead and talk about super saturation. How can you even tell if your jar is saturated? Well, I'm going to show you. Okay, I don't know how I'm going to show you without some special lights, so we'll just do this. Okay, guys, here we are. Let's bring you over here. All right. You've been working on your jar. You followed all those wonderful steps that I laid out there for you to cheaply and efficiently remove all excess lipids, fats, waxes, different particulates that can make their way through the BHL extraction, butane extraction, hydrocarbon extraction, whatever it may be. You're done your due diligence, and you got a nice jar evapping. It's got not you don't CRC, so you don't need to worry about dialing in a beautiful color. You already know what the fuck's up. Now, how do I tell when it's saturated enough for me to cap it and let it sit in the oven for 1 day, 2 days, 5 days, 1 week, 3 weeks? All this is determined by crystal growth and strain and saturation. Now, you're going to get things to grow much faster by waiting until your solution is as saturated as possible with enough solvent left in it to create pressure. Does that make sense? How can you tell when your solution is saturated? I want you to look down through the oil as I pick this up over the lights. See those little lines in there? Let me do this without, sorry, let me do that without spilling it. I don't know if you can see him or not on camera. Let's try something else. Okay. So now you're going to be able to see him. See those little lines there? That is your oil floating in your butane. See that? See how they're all coming off the sides there, and they're even starting to congeal and connect? That's your oil separating out of your butane and trying to separate itself from the hydrocarbon. Specifically because terpenes are a co-solvent. Your terpene content at this stage is not going to be doing this. What's doing this striation are your cannabinoids. And of course, with the cannabis that I ran, THC. So how do I know when I want to cap it? Well, do you see the level of striations that are in there right now? And this is something that you will need to dial in with practice. The level of striations that are in there right now are specifically at, pardon. Okay, so the amount of oil that is proved its saturation And it's striating. We're creating striations, as you can see there. There they are. As you can see, those striations are being created at that density, or at that volume, that level of I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. You're seeing that much striation because we are at 22.9 degrees. That's our off-gassing temperature right now. We are nowhere near. First off, the butane boils at 30.2. And if you notice, it's not boiling. So what do? We're gonna go back in here. We have our sauce and our oven, of course, set to 72.5 degrees. Still not sure why the point value hasn't climbed a little bit more there. Either way, I don't know. Okay. Anyway, sorry guys. I got lost there. All right, I will bring you guys back here when we have a little bit more evaporation done. We're going to let that 23-degree jar of oil, butane and oil, sit inside of my 72.5-degree oven with its inlet port open so that it can evaporate. And we will come back when enough evaporation has occurred that I have the ability to show you a ridiculous number of striations. And you'll see the lines coming through there. It looks like, dozens and dozens of snakes, or just dozens and dozens of little lines throughout. And then, of course, the other major thing that you want to play that back and forth with your variables: the level of striation, the level of saturation, along with your boiling off temperature. When your off-gassing temperature is reaching 40 and 45 and 50 degrees, at that point, I'm not sure how much butane there is left. It's going to be residual. Obviously, there's butane in there. There's always going to be butane in there until I get to purge it out with the use of this pump. But if you don't keep enough butane in there to create enough pressure to push back against the top of that lid and above that line where your oil is, because above that line where your oil is and below your lid, we call that our headspace. If you don't leave enough solvent in there to create enough pressure in that headspace, THCA will not fall out. Diamonds will not crash. So again, I'll bring you back now that we've combined and we've seen the striation and we've seen the amount of saturation that we've been able to achieve. Who knows, it might even be a little easier without that light on. Or not. What the hell? Oh. God, I'm sorry. This is why my videos are so fucking unwatchable. Anyway, you've seen the level of striation. See him floating back and forth, trying to act like wrinkly old skin on top of the oil. So once we've increased the number of striations there, numerously, we will obviously have increased our saturation. And once we have reached supersaturation, and we're not only at supersaturation, but we're reading a temperature that is conducive to there being some but a little butane left to evaporate on its own in there. And for me, when the off-gassing oil is approaching 40 degrees Fahrenheit, I cap it. Sometimes I cap it even before then, depending on the level of striations in the jar. But we'll get into that a little bit here at the final part of the video. So thank you all for sticking with me so far. Again, just to give you a quick rundown, by pouring our initial extraction into a Pyrex, letting it sit for a couple minutes in a cold room, and then pouring that off half at a time into this jar, letting that jar sit in that same cold room to collect more fat on the bottom, and then pouring the top of that off into these two jars. After we had the solution at least that clean of its wax, we took those two jars, capped them, and put them in the freezer for a half an hour. After being in the freezer for a half an hour, when they came out, they had pretty significant discs of white fat along the bottom of them. And we poured those two jars into two clean jars. Once that had evaporated down enough, I picked the jar that had a tiny remnant of some wax, as you can see there on the bottom, left in it, the dirtier of the two, and poured that out into the cleaner of the two. Now we're waiting for the final amount to evaporate, and once we've reached our supersaturation, and we like the temperature that we are in, or at which we are, then we're going to cap it, and we're going to call that the end of part 1 on how to cheaply and effectively make fire diamonds and sauce without $80,000 worth of equipment, without $20,000 worth of, without maybe 10. A closed loop system. I mean, I have a pretty decent oven, but it's a Best Value Vax. It's cheap, but I have a nice closed loop system. So that's expensive, but I'm maybe $10,000 to $15,000 in, and I have 3 washing machines, multiple freezers, multiple vacuum ovens. There's only one in this garage, obviously. This is a temporary lab setup. A closed loop system, a full short path and fractional distillation setup, 3 pneumatic pumps, 1 recovery pump, 1 Welch distillation pump. And then, of course, aside from that, I have bags and bags and bags and bags for days. Now, if that wasn't enough, I got a little pollen maker over there for when I'm doing 2 or 3 other things, and I'd like to be doing a 4th one. And once I finish with just about everything, or any part of the process out here, I bring it in here and we press it. Rosin Press New York, 10-ton rosin press. Been kicking some ass for me for a minute now. But I have my 4x7 inch plates, much larger unit with a 20-ton cylinder and the hand jack off to the side with a pressure gauge. I am actually ordering 2 of those. So as far as upgrades and things go, yeah, the lab is definitely growing. Okay, I'll bring you guys back in when we're ready to wrap up part 1 of how to efficiently and effectively prepare diamonds and sauce without $100,000 worth of equipment. Yeah, something like that will be the title. And then for part 2, we'll bring those diamonds and sauce all the way out, and I'll show you how we purge them, and we'll probably wrap that video up with a fat ass dab. All right, guys. Hope you're enjoying. Okay, so depending on what you have going on, what amount of, how big your extraction is, etc. God damn it, I don't have flash on. So depending on how big your extraction is, or depending on how thick your solution is, etc. Sometimes it takes a little more. I'm also, this oven's new to me, so Anyway, I don't know what was going on there, but I couldn't get it. I had it set for 72.5 and it just wouldn't get hotter than 70.4. So I guess the calibration's off. Anyway, I bumped it up 5 degrees and we're gonna see if what I need to set it to get this to be right around 72.5 to 73 degrees inside the oven. When that happens, and when that's happening from the bottom and all sides, of course, it should finish aiding the evaporation of that jar. And then, of course, I'll bring you guys back in. We'll cap that baby. And after that, I'll bring you back in a week and we'll shoot part 2. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're about to wrap this baby up. As you can see here, we're much thicker now. It actually looks pretty dark with it being 4 lit, but the clarity is completely on point, I promise you. It's just the bubbles that are covering it up there. Anyway, let's get a look at our striations. And I have to close this fucking door to get the light to work here. There we go. Look at that. I almost can't see anything in here without seeing a striation. So, you all know what time it is. Let's see if I can get it situated there for a second while I tighten the jar. Let me get a little sticky something right here. All right, look at that. Got a little bit of a bubble left, and within really very soon. And again, let's get a look at that clarity. That's gorgeous. No CRC, obviously. And this is not live resin, not CRC, not even fresh material. This is cured resin, properly extracted, properly winterized. The clarity is there. And now, see that? We're building up a little bit of pressure, slowly but surely. So, 77.5 hit 75.3, so, oops. So 75.5 will hopefully get to 72.5. I don't know. Either way, I like between 72 and 73 degrees for crashing stones. 80 degrees is too hot. 60 degrees takes forever. Yeah, you'll grow you can grow fucking 3 big geodes in here if you do it just right and crash them at about 58 or 60 degrees. But it'll take 6 months. Maybe 2 or 3, but it could be longer too. Also, real quick, take a look at the jar here and notice the viscosity. Almost all of the butane has evaporated out of it, except for what you see there. Obviously, those little bubbles you see going there. But a lot of the, look at you remember the coloring that we were at a little bit ago when we had 2 full jars of this solution. So 75 or 80% of that solution has evaporated away, and we're left with 20 to 25% left, which is very, very saturated. I'm excited. This is going to be a good one. So now, We've moved it around enough. Oh yeah, we got some pressure going there. And not too much either. All right, lid is secure. Looks like we're coming down. Yep, I might have hit it right on the money. Wanted it between 72.5 and 75 degrees. I'm sorry, 72.5 and 73 degrees, and looks like we're cooling down here. Maybe I'll even go. $74.5. So that should clearly read cooler. Or I mean, it should get cooler because the calibration's off a little bit. But then again, maybe it just took that long for it to equilibrate. Yeah, shit, I think it just took that long for it to equilibrate. All right, guys. The lid is on secure. The jar is sitting on a shelf, not touching any of the sidewalls. And the sidewalls are maintaining a 73.5 degree temperature. And let's go ahead and let's play with it. Let's get to my magic number. 72.5. All right, we'll see what's up, and we'll be back here. We'll bring you back here in a week. It's got some work to do on its own now. We've done our due diligence. Now we're going to let a little bit of the organic chemistry take place. And when I bring you guys back in for video number 2 of this series, we'll probably start off with a good 15 or 20 minute discussion on efficient winterization, particulate, anthocyanin, chlorophyll, why they will rob you of being able to crash THCA, and then just a crash course on crystallography. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, hope you enjoyed part 1.